let's go back to Luke chapter 1. Let's go back and see why it's possible that Zechariah's words may not have been right. By the way, when God makes you a promise, let your words say the same thing. Don't act like or don't say God's not going to do it. I don't know how it's going to happen. You don't have to know how God's going to do it. God's going to do it. Tell someone God's going to do it. All right, verse 18 of Luke chapter 1. And Zechariah said to the angel, how shall I know this? For I am an old man and my wife is well advanced in years. And the angel answered and said to him, I am Gabriel who stands in the presence of God and was sent to speak to you and bring you these glad tidings. But behold, you will be mute and not able to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled when? My version says, in their own time. Every word, by the way, let's see what he's talking about. Verse 13 is one word. You're going to bear a son and call his name John. Many will rejoice at his birth. That's one word. There's a second word here in verse 15. He will be great in the sight of the Lord. That's going to happen later in his life. So these are two different things. He'll turn, verse 16, many children of Israel to their Lord. He'll go in the spirit and power of Elijah. So there are different things the Lord is saying are going to happen. And he says here in verse 20, the end of verse 20, that all of these things will be fulfilled in their own time. Everything that God has said to you will be fulfilled in its own time. But don't make the mistake that Zechariah said, how am I supposed to know this? Because look at me, I'm old and we're well advanced in years. God didn't tell you to look at your circumstances because they don't define what God is going to do for you. A lot of us have had trouble. A lot of us have had, even Hurricane Sandy, as Valerie said, has set many people back. But Sandy is not greater than the Lord. God doesn't need everything to be just right. He can make things right. So the angel had to divinely close Zechariah's mouth. Very strange. Why? I mean, we can speculate. We're not told why specifically, but it's very possible his words were harsh against the Lord. Right? That was what we saw in Malachi. And he was going to be the father of the one that would come in the power of Elijah. The one that Zechariah just said would come after that. So he couldn't let the harsh words come from the prophetic word. You can't have a promise and doubt it at the same time. You have to believe it. And so because he didn't, his words his mouth had to be stopped. He had to be closed. And so now he could no longer speak until it was fulfilled. He is the first one. Let me tell you something, and I won't be long. I'll close with a couple of points here that I see in this story, and I'm going to tell you about somebody else. First, it starts with a word from the Lord. What is the Lord saying? What is God saying? For example, I believe, as I've said before, our church, this congregation, is going to be a mission-minded congregation. That we will be a congregation that plants churches, that builds orphanages, that will build schools, that will build healing centers and health facilities. In fact, and that may be overseas, but in this country as well, we're going to see other things that I've already gotten planned in mind, that God is going to bless us to build some halfway houses for those coming out of prison and for some shelters, some homeless shelters. Now you say, well, how can that be? We don't have very many people yet. It starts with a word from the Lord. I'm not going to make the mistake Zechariah said, and don't you make the mistake either. And looking at what you have and don't have and say, God can't possibly do anything for me.